Welcome back. It is Power Rankings time again, and you can see the Christmas tree at the top, Christmas tree at the bottom, because it's that time of year. But yeah, so 1 through 32, standard. Everything's the same, except in terms of this week's Power Rankings, 1, 2, 3 teams stayed in the same spot. That's it. 3. So, some movement. I wear the jersey of the team that's moved up the most. It's the only spoiler that I really provide. But at any rate, let's go ahead and start off with number 32 this week. Last week they were number 31, and that's Anaheim. Now, there are Duck fans who think I've been too hard on them, but they're 1-9 in their last 10, and that loss against Chicago told me they're the worst team in the league right now. And it's been a while since we saw Anaheim win a game in regulation and look really good, and I mean the comeback victories were fun at the start of the year, but yeah, it's kind of fallen apart for them. So number 31. Moving up one spot from last week, Chicago. So the Chicago Blackhawks, who are 4-5-1 in their last 10 games, they move up one spot. They've won 2 in a row, and so they're out of last place. They're 31st, which means San Jose did not drop back this week, which would have been odd since San Jose actually had a pretty good week. So that's the 2 that are outside of the top 30. We get into the top 30. Number 30 this week, also dropping one spot from last week. 2-5-3 in their last 10. Seattle. Seattle. It's been a while since they won a game, as I mentioned in the review video tonight. They're about due for, if they lose 10 in a row, I have to do a video on them. That's my rule I made for myself. 10 wins in a row, 10 losses in a row, I have to do a video. And so Seattle, who I just did a video on, I'm not sure how I do another video that way. The last time I talked about this was Anaheim, and I didn't end up having to worry about it. But yeah, Seattle. It's been a while since they've won a game, and so they end up 30th this week. Number 29, moving up one spot from last week. And 5-4-1 in their last 10, the San Jose Sharks. Yep, San Jose all the way up to 29th. And again, they've had a very good road trip, but part of what I said with San Jose, and this was a few weeks ago, was they built up so many losses, and they're so far down in the standings. They will move up if they're winning, but it's a little bit harder for them. That being said, they've passed 3 teams so far. I wouldn't rule out them passing others. They're outworking their opposition, is what it is. They're outworking the opposition. They've caught some teams snapping on them, so teams just seemingly coming into the game with the idea of, well, we're going to beat them, or teams getting a lead and then kind of sitting back like, well, it's San Jose. They're not going to hurt us. I watched the Islanders do that this week. I watched Detroit do that this week, and to their own detriment. All right, number 28, dropping one spot from last week. They're also 5-4-1 in their last 10, and that's Columbus. Columbus, it's been some up and down for them recently. Not enough to take them out of the bottom row, not enough to drive them further down into the bottom row. But yeah, 28th this week for the Columbus Blue Jackets. And I don't foresee them necessarily being out of the bottom row soon. With Jenner out for the next 6 weeks, it'll be interesting to see how things go. Now, they did beat St. Louis, but that ends up hurting St. Louis on the board. The Blues, a team that are not in the bottom row yet. But if they keep up what they've been doing, they could end up in the bottom row soon. Number 27, dropping 3 spots from last week. And they're 3-5-2 in their last 10. Buffalo. Tough go for the Buffalo Sabres. There's been some good moments where it feels like, hey, they're turning things around, and then they just can't help but shoot themselves in the foot. Those back-to-back games or just being able to come up with 2 really solid games in a row, it's been a challenge for the Buffalo Sabres. So, yeah, 27th this week for Buffalo. It's the first time they've been in the bottom row in 2 weeks because they were 24th last week, which brought them up here, and they're right back in the bottom row again this week. So, yeah, tough go of it for Buffalo. Number 26. And in the same spot as last week, Montreal. So for the Montreal Canadiens, they're 5-4-1 in their last 10 now. They had a decent week, but again, for Montreal, a team that we understand that they're, not exactly whatever form they're going to be when they become a playoff team and a contender again. They're still winning enough games to stay in the hunt. They're winning enough games to stay in the hunt. I don't think they're going to push towards a playoff spot, but again, they're winning just enough games here to keep themselves in the conversation. We'll see how it goes the rest of the way. Number 25, dropping 4 spots from last week. 4. 4 spots. I got to change the puck. I can't use the same puck as last week for Calgary because I used Atlanta last week. I can't do that this week. Number 25 is Calgary. They drop 4 spots. They're 5-5 over their last 10, which is fine if you're up in this part of the board, but 5-5 when you're below 500, it makes things more difficult for you. So the Calgary Flames, the loss against Minnesota. Today they have the loss against New Jersey. It's just not turned around. I'm looking at tomorrow's preview board. At least they have tomorrow off. But yeah, for the Calgary Flames, this has been a rough go, and it's just hasn't gotten a lot better for them. Number 24, moving up 4 spots from last week. So out of the bottom row, Minnesota. The Minnesota Wild move up 4 spots. Now, they did lose back-to-back games at the end of the week, right? And now tomorrow, they've got the game in Seattle. That starts at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific. And we'll see if Minnesota stays here or if Seattle wins their first game in a while and bumps Minnesota down beyond Calgary. But again, Minnesota did beat Calgary this week, so at least that's one argument that I won't be seeing in the comments. There's usually arguments of, but this team beat this team. Why is this team ahead of this team? So anyway, but yeah, Minnesota's out of the bottom row. We'll see if they stay there. Number 23, dropping 8 spots from last week. 8. So that's a lot. Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh Penguins, who have been kind of feast or famine this year, and right now it's kind of famine. They're 3-4-3 in their last 10, and yeah, it's not going in their direction. Last night they get that lead on Florida. Nope. Their penalty kill puts them here. Their penalty kill has caused them to drop. Just a few power play goals sprinkled in their last 5 or 6 games would have gone a long way to helping them win some. And they're just not getting the victories. So Pittsburgh, a team that on paper is better than this, but on paper it doesn't matter when you play the games and you're just not getting the results. All right, number 22, moving up 1 spot from last week. And the Islanders are 7-1-2 in their last 10. And so for Islander fans, and I thought when I saw this, I went, all right, Islander fans are not going to be mad. So let's go over their week. They had the overtime loss against San Jose to start things off. And that was a game they should have won. They beat Columbus 7-3. Well, Columbus is down here and San Jose's down here. And then tonight they had the comeback victory against the LA Kings. So they move up 1 spot from last week. I understand they're 7-1-2 in their last 10, but when you look at this week's work, again, they lost the 2 points against San Jose. They just get the 1 instead. They get 2 against Columbus, and then they get 2 against LA. But this is why I talk about how a team is playing will decide whether I move a team up or move a team down. So they get 5 out of 6 points this week, but they just move up the 1 spot. So I expect there to be some upset Islander fans, but I've explained it as well as I can. Number 21, moving down 2 spots from last week. Nashville. So they're 7-3 in their last 10. But tonight against Toronto, they get shut out. They've lost, I think it's 2 of their last 3 now. But for Nashville, they're trending towards being a playoff team. The bad news for them is that the Oilers are trending towards being a playoff team too. So for teams that have had mediocre records and been able to stay in the hunt for a playoff spot, if the Oilers keep going the way they are, it's going to make it so that that's a lot less likely in the West to get you into a playoff spot. Number 20, moving down 2 spots from last week, St. Louis. St. Louis Blues are 4-6 in their last 10. And it's been a rough go for them since beating Vegas in Vegas. And then their next 2 games, not good. So St. Louis continues to be wildly unpredictable. Hard to figure out exactly what team you're looking at from one day to the next with St. Louis. Is it the team that went in and took care of Vegas, or the team that then went home and couldn't take care of Vegas and then today couldn't take care of the Chicago Blackhawks either? So for St. Louis, they're a team that could very well end up in a playoff spot, but right now they're 13-13-1, and if they can't get above 500, somebody in the West is going to start pegging off a lot of wins, and it's going to get more difficult for St. Louis if they can't turn things around. All right, number 19, moving up 3 spots from last week, Senators. So the Sens are 11-11 right now. Their last 10 games, they're 6-4. The win they had today in Detroit, that was an impressive victory. It was a pretty rough victory, but that's how games are going to be as we get closer to the playoffs. So playing in those physical, hotly contested games like the one against Detroit today, That kind of environment, something that Ottawa should be comfortable with if they're going to make that jump and become a playoff team. Which, again, right now they're 11-11. They've played less games than everybody else. This month they're making up some of those games in hand. They have to keep winning, so they have to go on a bit of a streak. But they moved up to 19 this week. Number 18, moving up 2 spots from last week. And overall, a decent week for them, I think. Tampa Bay. So Tampa Bay, they get the win tonight against Seattle. Overall, not a bad week. They do get the win against Dallas after being killed by Dallas before that. They're 4-5-1 in their last 10, but it does feel like Tampa Bay is starting to figure things out and get there. It's just taken a little bit longer than I think some of us thought it would. But yeah, Tampa Bay should figure it out. They should be in the playoffs. But the East, there's going to be at least 1 or 2 surprises amongst the teams that end up missing the playoffs. Number 17, moving up 8 spots from last week. They are 7-3 in their last 10, and it's Edmonton. So I have seen some power rankings that have Edmonton like top row. Just like that's it, they're back top row. I don't generally do that. The reason being that if the Oilers then have a bad week, I have to readjust them back down. And I mentioned I did that with Tampa Bay a couple weeks ago. I wasn't happy with that. So it has been a gradual climb for the Edmonton Oilers, but they've climbed from 27th to 17th in 2 weeks. I think that's a pretty good climb. And that's about the limit that I like to have on a climb at this time of year. And again, if the Oilers are as good as they've looked over this 6-game winning streak, they're just going to keep going up. So there really shouldn't be any concern. I know there's going to be people who are upset about some of the teams that are top 16 ahead of the Oilers, so that's why I'm mentioning it. But there are some that just skip to the end to complain anyways. So this happens. And I'm not going to get back to years ago. I would rearrange at the end of the video and put like, San Jose first, that kind of thing, and then just try to explain why, and then people will get mad, and I'd be like, and just skip to the end. I don't do that anymore. Number 16. I felt like at one point I was like, okay, channel's too big for me to be doing that kind of garbage, so I'm not doing it. Number 16, same spot as last week. 5-5 in their last 10, Arizona. The Coyotes, there's a spot there. So again, the Oilers are coming up, but St. Louis is dropping off. Nashville's been up and down. There's a spot there for Arizona. Now, they lost today, and they lost their last game against Philadelphia as well. I thought they played well at points against Boston today, and again, losing in Boston isn't really anything to be ashamed of, and Philadelphia is ahead of them on the board too. So I do take that into consideration when teams lose. I say, okay, they lost to a team ahead of them. Did they deserve to be bumped down? And my answer with Arizona was not really. So could I switch Edmonton and Arizona? Maybe, but I didn't do that today. But this coming week, I do expect, like next Saturday, I expect the Oilers to be in the top 2 rows. We'll see if Arizona's the team that they pull out of that top 2 rows, or if it's the team that's 15th on the board, dropping 2 spots from last week is Detroit. So the Red Wings add Patrick Kane, and I mean, Kane is still Patrick Kane. He has a goal in those 2 games, but they haven't won in those 2 games. So for Detroit, you're in that spot where you've added a big name. It doesn't always translate to results on the ice. So it could end up turning around, but so far they're 0-1-1 with Kane in the lineup. The 4-goal lead against San Jose. Honestly, I could have justified dropping them down to 18th. I didn't, but I could justify having them below Tampa Bay based on that 4-goal lead they blew against San Jose, and they lost that in overtime. They even had the 5-4 lead and couldn't hold that. Of course, for Detroit, coming out of that loss tonight against Ottawa, the concern is Larkin, right? Larkin did skate off under his own power, which is good news, but how much time is Larkin going to miss? That's a big deal. And with the fact he got knocked out, I can't see how he wouldn't have a concussion, right? So with Detroit, they may very well be a team that ends up in the 3rd row next week. But that being said, we've seen teams go through major injuries and do well. We've seen teams get big players back from injury and then they fall off. So there's no telling what will happen for Detroit this week. Number 14, moving up 3 spots from last week, and they're back. New Jersey Devils. They're back in the top 2 rows. They're back in a potential playoff spot. They look good. I think this is a team that's capable of going on a run, and so get your futures in on New Jersey, because I do think that for the rest of the way, New Jersey should kind of be a bandwagonish team. I say ish because the goaltending does kind of concern me with Nashville, but maybe that figures itself out, or maybe they just stop allowing shots. we've seen that with teams before. Part of the reason Edmonton's gotten better is because they're not allowing as many prime opportunities. So if New Jersey can do that too, it'll make their goaltending look better. Number 13, moving up one spot from last week. Just the one spot. Philadelphia. The Flyers are in the top half of the board, and they're moving their way up. They got a couple of big wins this week against Arizona, and that win in Colorado, that was fantastic. Really big win for Philly. And so Philly and Pittsburgh were right next to each other. Was it last week? Yeah. So they're no longer right next to each other. Philadelphia looks like the real deal. I hope they are. The Flyers are an entertaining team, and they were kind of left for dead by everybody in their predictions, myself included. And they're due for a run in the playoffs of some sort. So we'll see what happens. Because again, Philadelphia, in the time I've watched hockey, they occasionally go on runs to the Stanley Cup final. It's not understandable before or after, but it happens. The 2010 run being the most recent, and that tells me they're overdue. So we'll see if they are due or not. Number 12 on the board, dropping one spot from last week, and 5-4-1 over their last 10 games. Capitals. So the Caps today, they get that win over the Rangers. The Caps have been very up and down. So we'll see whether or not that win over the Rangers really, brings them back to where they want to be. Again, they're 5-4-1 in their last 10. They had bad games on that road trip that they won. They had good games on the road trip they lost. Washington's kind of in that St. Louis category too, the difference being they're one row directly above St. Louis. But for Washington, that win over the Rangers shows they can be dangerous, and they're scoring without needing Ovechkin to get goals. They're winning without Ovechkin needing to get goals. They're not scoring enough, but they've still got a 13-8-3 record overall. They still look like they're going to be a playoff team at this point. We'll see whether or not that ends up being the case. Number 11, dropping 6 spots from last week. They're now 4-5-1 in their last 10. Carolina. So Carolina jumped up to number 5 from number 10, and now they're back down to number 11. I don't think they're going to want to go through Western Canada again. The good news is they don't have to, because that's the other conference. That's 2 West Coast swings they've gone through that have just decimated them in the power rankings. So I think I mentioned this in the review. I'll mention it again here. I feel like that's video worthy, talking about the Carolina road trips that have made their record look a lot worse than what it should be, you would think, when you look at some of the opponents that they've had mediocre results against. So, Carolina, rough go of it. The goaltending's questionable, the defense is questionable, and Rod Brind'Amour really let him have it. Not during the Canucks game, but the one before, talking about how he was surprised they weren't behind like 50-0, or however he put it. It's been ugly for Carolina. They're going to be glad to no longer go out to the West Coast, and just West Coast is just gone. No more West Coast. Number 10, and dropping 6 spots from last week as well, Dallas. So at the end of the Dallas game today, Daryl Ray, and Razor's fantastic. I love Razor, great announcer, was talking about how, hey, points percentage-wise, Dallas is still ahead of, and he named off all these teams. Dallas points percentage-wise is only below, and named off, I think it was Vegas and LA that they're behind. But they're not playing particularly well. They are 4-4-2 over their last 10 games. The loss against Tampa, and now today the loss against Vegas, there's no consistency, and it's in-game too. It can be frustrating to watch, and honestly, I don't think Ottinger's been his best either. I feel like Ottinger's had some rough games. I'm starting to think Wedgwood might be the better of the two right now. Not overall, obviously Ottinger's a really good goaltender, but right now, I might take Wedgwood ahead of Ottinger. But again, we'll see whether or not the Stars can bounce back. But they're out of the top row this week. Number 9, moving up 3 spots from last week, almost back in the top row for Toronto. They're close. The Toronto Maple Leafs move their way up to number 9. Impressive victories. I think they're playing well right now. I think the amount of criticism they get is kind of insane. I just find it weird. Like, the record's good. And over their last 10 games, they're 7-1-2. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good record, but I know there's people who just hate Toronto, want to tear it apart. It doesn't matter how you're getting points, just as long as you get them. And tonight they got 2 points without Wall. And when he went down, there was, well, that's it. Toronto's done. Nope. And I don't see any reason to think they're going to be done either. I don't expect Martin Jones to put up a 900 save percentage, because that's traditionally not been a thing. But I do expect him to win games, because it's what he does. So for as long as Wall is out, I think Toronto's going to win enough games to stay comfortably in a playoff spot. and I still think there's a chance that they end up threatening for the division this year, if not end up winning the division themselves. All right, number 8. So now we move into the top row. Top row, number 8, 6-4 in their last 10, finally winning 2 games in a row and starting to look like the Vancouver Canucks we saw early in the season. So the wins against Carolina and Minnesota impressed me, and we'll see if that's now how they're going to be playing going forward, right? Vancouver got into some bad habits. Their defense was having issues. Their penalty kill having issues. Maybe Zadorov's got it together. I know there was a lot of hate thrown towards Tyler Myers. He should be a healthy scratch. I'm not there. I think Myers this year has been far better than he's been in the other seasons as a Canuck. He does have a rough game here and there, and I think that the fan base a little bit critical of him when he has a game that if another defense, like if he and Cole had the same game, I don't think there'd be the calls for him to get benched, but it's a running Myers thing. But the Canucks are back in the top row. JT Miller's at 40 points. Demko's got 13 wins. They're 15-0-0 if they have a lead after 2 periods. Pretty strong play. Number 7 on the board, moving up 2 spots from last week. 6-4 in their last 10. Boston. They're 6-4, right? 5-4-1 in their last 10. But Boston, they get the win over Arizona. They're still winning enough games, and with some of the poor play by Dallas and Carolina over the last 7 days, Boston ends up moving up. So it benefits Boston. It benefits Vancouver as well. I do think that with Boston, I have some concerns when it comes to Boston's play overall. Do they play that full 60 minutes? They had the loss against Buffalo. They started the game slow against Arizona. They come out, they end up getting the win against Arizona. They're still winning enough games that they're in the top row, but I do not see them as a top 5 team right now in the NHL. Number 6, moving up 2 spots from last week as well. They are 6-3-1 in their last 10. Florida. The Florida Panthers, good run for them lately. They're dangerous. Their goaltending's quite good. They do move up the 2 spots, like I said, 6-3-1 in their last 10. And so for Florida fans, it's a good time. I mean, you guys are number 6. Tampa Bay's number 18. There you go. Florida has a good chance of winning that division too. It does feel like Florida, Boston, Toronto are probably going to be your top 3 in that division, but Tampa Bay's put up enough points in overtime and shootouts to stay in the hunt for that. So we'll see if it stays that way. Number 5. So we get into the top 5, and dropping from last week. Dropping 2 spots? Yes. Dropping 2 spots is Colorado. The Avs, back-to-back losses at home against Philadelphia and the Winnipeg Jets. Troubling? Sure. Overly concerning? Probably not. Colorado, it feels like they're pacing themselves. Whether they are or they're not, we'll find out in April. But it does feel like they're pacing themselves. Usually January is seen as like the dog days in the NHL, where there's just some lazy games and some really good teams will have some lazy play. It kind of feels like it's happening earlier this year than normal. It feels like there's so many teams that should be better that aren't, and teams that should be bad that aren't. And Colorado's one of those too, where they've had so many occasions where you'd go, well, they should win this, and then they don't necessarily. But they're still top 5 on the board, so they're winning enough to stay there. Number 4, moving up 3 spots from last week. Vegas Golden Knights. So Vegas is 5-2-3 in their last 10. They did open up the week with the loss against St. Louis, and then they took it out on everybody else after that. So the Vegas Golden Knights, tomorrow they've got the game against San Jose. That'll be an interesting one if San Jose beats them. I would say if San Jose beats Vegas, I could justify bumping them up past Buffalo. And for Vegas, that would bump them down maybe past Florida. We'll see how Florida does against Columbus, because if Florida beats Columbus and Vegas loses against San Jose, Florida would probably be number 4 tomorrow night. I don't do power rankings tomorrow night, so sorry, Florida. Number 3. I did have somebody message me, though, on Facebook that's a subscriber, but I'm friends with him on Facebook as well, asking me about how his team was doing, so I just took like a little picture of the power rankings to say, here's where your team's at right now. And he's like, hey, cool. So, but I don't generally do that during the week, and I only did that because I know he's not going to, look where the power rankings are. And it was just a couple days ago, so I figured, it'll be moot point on Saturday. So, that story and tangent aside, number 3 on the board, moving up 3 spots from last week, Winnipeg. This is the highest I think the Jets have ever been on the power rankings. Although back in the 2017-2018 season, there might have been a point where they were number 1, because they did finish second overall in the NHL. But that was like 5 years ago. So insane I've been doing power rankings that long, isn't it? But yeah, number 3, Winnipeg. And yet still, people are like, you need to stop doing them the way you're doing them and do it this way. And it's like, there's no way to do power rankings everybody's going to agree with. There just isn't. So Winnipeg's number 3 this week. They are 7-3 in their last 10. And that win, now the win over Colorado is one thing. It's how they won, and it's the fact that they're doing it consistently. So I would say that Winnipeg and Philadelphia right now are 2 teams that people don't want to mess around with. People aren't going to really want to play against. It's not a lot of fun to play against them. And yeah, Winnipeg right now, top 3. And I mentioned Philadelphia just because I think the way Philadelphia is playing, they could end up in the top row sooner rather than later too. Number 2, dropping 1 spot from last week. Yep, the ride's over. New York Rangers. After 3 straight weeks at number 1, back-to-back losses for the Rangers forced them down to number 2. And I thought about this one. So here's the thing. There isn't a team in the NHL right now that's flawless, which is great, right? Because you still have that feeling of nobody's, bulletproof. Anybody can lose on any given night, which we've seen with a lot of the teams in the top row. So the Rangers lose back-to-back games, lopsided losses in both cases, but I thought, well, I'm not going to have them in first place, but I'm not going to bump them down lower than second this week. So this coming week, I will take a look at Ranger games and see how they do. Tomorrow they're at home against, oh, look at that. Tomorrow night, the New York Rangers are at home against the LA Kings. The LA Kings move up to number 1. And I was talking to Yvonne about this when the Kings moved up to number 1, and I said, I don't know that LA's ever been number 1. And she said she thought she remembered me having the Kings at the top of a power rankings board the first year that I did power rankings. So it's been a while, and I was impressed that she would remember that. She doesn't watch any of my videos, so obviously she didn't remember it for videos. She just remembered it from when I had the board open at all times and just out where people could see it. It used to be in the background of videos and people didn't even notice. Now there's no way I would take that chance of anybody going, is that the power rankings board? But yeah, LA's number 1. They've been excellent. They're 8-1-1 in their last 10. Yeah, they lost a 2-goal lead against the Islanders tonight, but I'm not going to bump them down and have Winnipeg number 1 this week or the Rangers stay at number 1. I felt like the Kings with that 11-game winning streak on the road, combined with the fact they've been quite good at home lately, and tomorrow night they're in against the New York Rangers. It's the battle for first place. So whoever wins that game tomorrow night ends up being first on the power rankings board on Sunday night as well. Again, I don't do daily power rankings, but I do update them daily. So there you go. You guys are all caught up. There's your power rankings for this week. Let me know why they're all wrong in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.